Hi, I'm Leo Laporte, the Computer Answer Man, and this is my computer. In this video, you're going to learn what's inside a computer like this, how to put one together yourself from scratch, and also a little bit about how computers work and what's inside them. Now, there are all kinds of computers, everything from big mainframes that would take up a room this big, to smaller mini computers that a dozen or so people would use at the same time, to microcomputers. Microcomputers are designed for a single user. Today's microcomputer is probably about as powerful as the mainframe computers of a few decades ago. And micros are a lot easier to use. There are all kinds of microcomputers. You've probably heard of Amiga and Macintosh, NeXT, Sun, and so on. The most popular kind of personal computer is the IBM PC compatible. IBM delivered its first PC back in 1981. Today, just a little more than a decade later, there are over 100 million IBM PC compatibles in use in America. They represent about 85% of all the microcomputers around. IBM compatibles like this one, PCs, we call them PCs, that stands for personal computer, are probably the most powerful tool humankind has ever invented. It's composed of a variety of different components. You'll see a keyboard, a monitor, and the box in the middle is the CPU. That's where the brain of the computer is. Okay, you ready to get started? All right, let's get going. We're going to build our own computer. All right, I've got a CPU here. This is the big box that really contains the main elements of the computer. Let's take the lid off and look inside. I've already removed the screws so it comes off easily. You'll screw it down later so you don't accidentally take the lid off. Now, if you look inside, you'll see there are a number of circuit boards. This big one in the back here, you can't see it all the way, but it goes about this big, is the motherboard, because it's the mother of all boards, I guess. Also inserted in here are smaller circuit boards that control the video display and the disk drive. These are the disk drives right here. This is a hard disk drive, and there are 2 floppy drives inserted in here. We'll get a closer look at all of these later. These controller cards, these little cards, control what's called peripherals because they're on the outside or the periphery of the CPU. All right, oh, and one more thing, that's the power supply. Without that, we wouldn't have any power. So those are all the components put together. Now we're going to go one by one through each of them so you'll understand a little bit better what they do and how you get them in the case. Okay, we've taken the motherboard out of the CPU case so we can take a closer look at it. There it is, not much to it. This big chip here is where all the action goes on. That's the microprocessor. This one's a 486 from Intel. Now, all IBM PC compatibles contain Intel chips or Intel chip clones. The original IBM PC contained an 8088. Shortly after that, in about 1984, Intel followed with an 80286. That was the original chip in the original IBM AT. Then there was an 80386. You still see a lot of those around today. And the 80486 we've got in this computer right here. So let's see, 80286, 80386, 80486. The next chip in the line should be, right, the Pentium. You see, Intel found out that they couldn't copyright the name 586, and to eliminate clones, they decided to go with a different naming scheme. The Pentium comes from the Greek word penti, which means 5, as in pentagon and pentangle and pent-up demand. The 486 in this processor, in this motherboard, we've decided, look, see, I just took it out right like that. There it is. We think that's the best combination of power and price, so we're going to use this one. A Pentium would cost you a lot more, and a 386 probably doesn't have quite enough oomph for some of the things that we're going to want to do. A 486 is a fairly inexpensive but very powerful chip, and it pops right in like this. There's one other good thing about a 486 chip, and that's many 486 motherboards are upgradable, like this one. This has what's called a zero insertion force socket. That's that lever right here. And it means that I can easily remove the chip and pop in a faster chip when Intel releases one. Just about that easy. All right, let's put it back in for now because that's the one we're going to use. Let's take a look at some of the items now, other items now on the motherboard. Okay, let's take a look at some of the other features on the motherboard. Right here is the section for memory. We call that RAM, or random access memory. When you use your computer, the data you're working on is stored right here in the RAM. After you're through working, you'll save the contents of the RAM to a disk. RAM is very fast, but it's only temporary. When you turn your computer off, everything in RAM disappears. Memory is measured in bytes. It takes about 1 byte to represent a single letter of text or a single digit. Your average typewritten page of text takes about 2,000 bytes, or we call it 2 kilobytes, or sometimes just 2K. Most PCs these days start with 1 million bytes, or 1 megabyte, 1 meg of RAM. That's enough for a lot of uses, but if you plan to put your computer to more advanced uses, like Microsoft Windows, you'll need to add RAM. We'll build our PC today with 4 megabytes. That should be enough to start with. RAM is inexpensive, only about 50 bucks a megabyte, so it'll be easy to add more RAM later. And we'll show you how to do that. RAM comes in chips like this. I don't know if you can see this. These are SIMs right here. That stands for Standard Inline Memory Modules. We've got 4 SIMs in this motherboard. Each SIM holds 4 megabytes of memory, so this is a 16 megabyte motherboard, 16 megabytes of RAM. Each SIM has 9 chips, 8 chips for the memory, and 1 extra RAM chip for error checking. So the computer we're going to make today will also have 4 SIMs, but each SIM will only contain 1 megabyte of RAM. It'll be a 4 megabyte motherboard. All right, let's talk about some of the other items on the motherboard. Right here is what they call the CMOS. The CMOS is where settings are stored for the computer. And after we build our computer, when we first turn it on, we're going to have to store settings in there about the kinds of disk drives we've put in, how much memory we've put in, what kind of video, and so forth. The CMOS chip is backed up by a battery here. That's what this is. And even when you turn your computer off, it saves those settings, so you don't have to tell it every time what kind of computer you've got. Over here are more RAM chips. These are a different kind of RAM. They're called cache RAM. They're very fast RAM chips that are used to store data just about as it's ready to go into the CPU up above. These chips are very expensive. This board has 128K of RAM, and most of the time your motherboard will come with these chips installed. Finally, up here is the BIOS chip. Actually, I'm sorry, this is the BIOS chip. It's right over there. Can you see it? Ours is called Mr. BIOS. That's the personality of the computer. The BIOS chip contains some small programs that are first run when you turn the computer on. These programs actually tell the computer how to read disks, how to display text on the screen, how to read the keyboard. Without the BIOS, your computer would truly be illiterate. Okay, I guess that's it for the motherboard. Let's take a look at some of the other devices inside your computer. All right, now it's time to choose a case to put our motherboard into. There are all kinds of cases. There are the tower cases you see here. There's a mini tower and a medium tower. And what I've got right here is a desktop case. They call it a desktop case because it sits on the desktop. Usually you'll put the monitor on top of it. Tower cases usually are on the floor underneath. Desktop cases slide open. Let's see if I can do this. Yep, slide open just like this. There's the lid. And as long as we've got it open, let's take a look inside here. I don't know if you can see this. This is obviously a case before we've put anything in. In fact, here's a little silica gel thing to keep it dry. We'll throw that out. Let's look at some of the things in here. I guess the first, most obvious one is this silver box. This is the power supply. This is the one that says, "Achtung, no serviceable user parts inside. Don't open unless you want to get zapped." Really, it says that right there. Don't open it, actually. It does contain high voltage, and there's really nothing you can do. If it doesn't work, you'll just unscrew it and put another one in. This one is a 200-watt power supply. You'll find the bigger PCs sometimes even with 300 or 350 watts. But 200 is about right for a 486. That's probably enough, unless you're going to add a lot of devices into the computer. The power supply is the single biggest generator of heat inside the computer. That's why there's a fan inside. In fact, you can't see it now. Let me see if I can turn it around. As you can see, there's vents on the back of the case. That's where the fan is. And of course, there's the plug sockets where you'll be plugging the power into. This socket is for the monitor. It'll plug right into the back there. Let's get back inside the case, see some of the other fascinating features. You can see there's a cage here. We'll be putting the disk drives in there, and a box here for the hard drive. And there are a lot of connectors. All right, there's 2 different kinds. These connectors here are power tails. That's what I call them. These 2 will power the motherboard. They come right out of the power supply. This will be for the disk drive. This will be for the hard drive. And this one will turn the light on the computer when you turn it on. These connect to things like the speaker on the PC, The original PC was only designed to go beep and boop, and that's the kind of speaker, just a little tiny speaker we've got in here. If you want anything more elaborate from the sound of the IBM PC, you'll have to buy a sound card. That's a little fancier device. This one goes to the turbo switch, the reset button. We'll explain what all those things are, and we'll connect them up a little bit later once we've got the motherboard in. Well, I guess that's about it. You'll see in the back here there are holes, openings for the adapter cards. Some of the adapter cards have connectors that go on the back, like the video card, and so they'll connect in here, and they'll have a connector that will go out the back, and that's what these slots are for. Guess that's about it. I think we can start putting things together. Okay, before we touch anything, a couple of warnings. First of all, make sure your computer is not plugged in. I know that seems obvious, but you'd be surprised how many people work on their machines with them plugged in. I even know someone who tried to add memory while the computer was on. Now, this is a very bright person who actually writes for a computer magazine. Needless to say, he fried the memory and almost fried himself. So, once again, make sure the machine is not plugged in. Check it now. Plugged in? No, we're safe. All right, now there's another thing to worry about, static electricity. You know, that's when you slide across a carpet on a cold winter day and then touch a doorknob and zap. That is the deadliest enemy of integrated circuits. You know, static electricity doesn't hurt you. It's very high voltage, millions of volts, but very low amperage. So it's harmless to human beings. But all those volts will fry a circuit. So we've got to keep static electricity at bay while we install this motherboard and the chips that are on it. So here's what we do. This is a static electricity wrist cuff. We'll put it on, and it grounds. You see it connects it to a static pad. We're going to put the motherboard on that as we work. And then it's connected to a ground, a cold water pipe, or in this case, it's connected right to the ground circuit in the electricity of the room. So that will keep the static electricity at bay. All I'll do is I'll just put this on. I want to explain what I'm doing so that when you see me wearing this thing, you don't think I'm crazy. And this will keep me from frying any of the little chips with static electricity. Also makes a lovely accessory, don't you think? If you don't have one of these, you can buy them for a few bucks at any electronic supply store. And I know it seems crazy, but it really is a good idea. You also might want to touch the silver case of the power supply every once in a while to discharge any static electricity you've built up. And if you can't find one of these static electricity wrist guards, then you can actually take the blue anti-static bag that your motherboard came in and put that down on the table, and then put the motherboard or the CPU on top of that. All right, we've taken the preventative measures against the dread static electricity. We've made sure we're not plugged in. It's time to get to work. All right, we've taken a look at the case, and we've taken a look at the motherboard. Now we're ready to put the two together and begin building our computer. It doesn't take really fancy tools to build a computer. Just, in fact, a simple tool set like this will do just fine. You probably won't even use half the tools in here. Really, all we need is a Phillips screwdriver and a flathead screwdriver. I call the Phillips a plus and the flathead a minus screwdriver. Now, if you really want to get fancy, you can use one of these things, a power screwdriver. They're great. You can go around scaring people. But we can dispense with that for the time being. All right, before we put the motherboard in, first thing we want to do is put the memory into the motherboard. Now, you can do that after you've installed the motherboard, but it's a lot easier when the motherboard is out and you can get at it. Remember these SIM modules? There they are. We've got 4 of them, a megabyte each, 9 chips. That's all they are. They're just a little circuit board with memory chips glued right onto them. Now, SIM modules go in very easily. Remember the SIM slots here on the motherboard. There they are. And I'm going to put in the first SIM. You put it in at an angle like that, and it'll seat pretty firmly. You'll know it's in there. You can jiggle it. Don't force it. If you're forcing it, you're probably doing it wrong. It'll go in. Once you've got it in, and remember it's at an angle, lie back a little bit, you'll slide it forward and it will snap, and that's when the metal clips, or sometimes they're plastic, grab hold, and there you go. It's in. It's just that easy. That's a whole megabyte already installed. Let's do another one. We're on a roll here. That's 2, forward, 3. Again, don't force these. They'll go in. It'll be pretty obvious if you've done it right. And especially if you have plastic clips, they can break those. And once you've broken a clip on a SIM slot, it's a real pain. You actually have to desolder the slot to remove it. So there you go. 4 megabytes right on the motherboard. You notice I have 4 extra slots. That means I can add 4 more megabytes, or I can even use 4 megabyte SIMs and put 16 more in. You do have to look at your motherboard's documentation, though, because a lot of times there are restrictions on how you can add memory. You might only be able to put the same kind of memory in one bank or so forth. In this case, 4 megabytes is all we're going to start with, and we'll worry about adding memory later. All right, we've got the memory in. I think it's time to put the motherboard in the case. You ready? All right, here we go. Okay, now we're ready to mount the motherboard into the case, and to do that we'll use 2 different kinds of hardware. Now, by the way, I should explain that all motherboards and all cases are different, and most motherboards have a lot of different holes to accommodate a lot of different cases, and the same thing for the cases. And your motherboard and case may go together differently, but this is how this one goes together, and you'll find a lot of them are the same. First, we'll use these brass bushings. You see right here, can you get a close-up on that? That will actually screw into the case, and then we'll screw the motherboard into the bushing. And then we'll also use 6 of these plastic posts, or standoffs. They'll go into the motherboard like this, and they'll attach there, and then these parts will hook right onto the case. So between the brass bushings and the plastic standoffs, we should be able to get this motherboard mounted in the case. Let me put the bushings in first. Now, what you'll have to do is actually look at the motherboard and see where their holes are and match them up to the holes in the case. And this takes a little measuring or eyeballing. It's not the easiest thing to do, but I've already done it ahead of time, so I know where I have to put the bushings in. And they'll go in over here. All right, I've got the bushings, and I've turned this on the side so we can see inside. Again, I've measured to make sure that I know where they're going. This bushing is going to go right here. You can actually screw it in by hand. It just screws in very easily like that. Then another one is going to go, let's see, right up. I can't find it. Oh yeah, there it is. Right in here. I don't know if you can see that. This is what the motherboard will be screwed down into, and it's just 3 screws. It's not a huge process of attaching it, and that's good because a lot of times when you want to upgrade your computer, the way you'll do it is just by taking out the old motherboard and putting a new one in. So we've got the 3 bushings in, and you can see they're inside the case. Now we're going to put the plastic posts into the motherboard so we can actually hang it into the case. All right, let's put the plastic posts in the motherboard. The motherboard will sit like this, so we're going to put the post in from the bottom, and this will hook onto the case once again. And once again, I've done the work ahead of time to figure out which holes need plastic posts. You'll have to do that, although they're not that hard to remove if you have needle nose pliers or even a chip puller. And it just slides right in like that. Not very complicated. The other one's going to slide right there. And we've got a couple down here, and that's about it. This one? You tell me. Okay. So, all right, we took a little break while I put the rest of them in, and you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. They're all in there, and now we're going to put the motherboard in the case, and if we did everything right, it'll all match up, and we can just screw it right down. Now, this is kind of hard to see, so I'm going to explain what's going to happen here. We've put these plastic posts in the motherboard, in the back of the motherboard, and actually what we're actually going to do is hang the motherboard like you would hang a picture on the slots here. There are slots in the case, and these plastic posts will go right in the slot and just like that hang there. You see that? Of course, the motherboard will be attached. And once they're inserted like that, we'll screw the screws down on the motherboard into these brass bushings that we've inserted. There's, again, 3 of them. And the motherboard will be attached. All right, I'm going to hang it right now. You won't be able to see very well, but let's just keep rolling while I do this. Let's see if I can do it without making too much of a mess. The one thing you have to look for is the keyboard connector on the motherboard. That will have to match up with the keyboard connector in your case. If it doesn't, you've put the motherboard in wrong, all right? So the keyboard opening for the keyboard is right here on our case. And there's the keyboard connector, so we know we've got it oriented right. And we're just going to slide it right in here. Make sure that we line up the plastic posts with the slots. Hey, they line up. I can't believe it. All right. Make sure they all are in there. And there'll be a nice firm kind of click when it goes in place. And there it is. Now all we have to do is screw it down, and we have installed a motherboard. All right. It fit. Can you believe that? There we go. Okay, so let's review. We've got the case and the motherboard together. We put the memory in the motherboard. We're halfway there. Now all we have to do is screw the motherboard down so it won't go flying around when you shake the case. Remember we put these brass bushings in there? Let me show you. Okay. We're going to just take a screw and screw them in just like that. That's why we put the brass bushings in, so it would screw in easily. Now there were 3 of them, so I've got 3 screws. And I have my power screwdriver. Make sure we go in the right direction, the clockwise direction. And, oh, now this is the part where you have to remember where you put the bushings. I think I put one right here. Probably a good idea not to use magnetic tools on these things. All right, I put the screws in by hand, and I'm just going to tighten them down using the power screwdriver. You don't have to tighten them too tight. You know, you're not building a tank here. And really, hand tightening is fine because barring earthquakes, I don't think these things are going to come out. And it's really possible to strip the screws, and then you really won't be able to get the motherboard out. That's all there is to it. Just 3 screws. That's all it takes. And we're done. We've got a motherboard. Now let's attach the power cables and see if this thing works. Most of the time, the motherboard, or you hope the motherboard will be labeled as to which one goes which, but there's one easy way to remember. The black cord goes next to the black cord. And since there's only one way that these connectors can go on, that really means there's only one way you can connect it. As long as black cord is next to black cord. Okay, so we're going to put the P8 in first. And again, you want to make sure you put these in right. If you put them in wrong, you could fry your power supply, or worse, fry your motherboard. You see how it's snapped in like that, and that angle, and then we slide it in. Don't force it. And then we'll put P9 in just the same way. It's got little plastic hooks that will attach on there. You got to put it in an angle, and it's easier said than done. Don't get frustrated. If you get angry or mad, don't take it out on the computer. Take a break and come back and finish it up later, because once these things are broken, they're a pain to get fixed. There we go. We got the power connectors right on the motherboard, and we got power on it. Now, it really doesn't make any sense to turn it on yet because we don't have anything connected to it. We wouldn't know if it were working or not. So let's get the video card in here and maybe put some disk drives in, and we'll know if the computer's working or not. We'll be putting both kinds of disk drive in our machines. You need 2 different kinds because, as you can see, the disks are 2 different sizes. Here's the 3.5-inch drive. It has a little 3.5-inch slot. We'll put the disk in just like that. And here is the 5.25-inch drive. It has a bigger slot. There's a piece of paper in here to protect it. I'll take that out. When they're shipped, they come like that. And we'll put the floppy right in there like that, and you close the door. All right. Our computer case has room for 5 drives total, 3 big ones and 2 little ones. Actually, that's good because there's one more kind of drive I want to put in, and that's called a hard disk drive, or a fixed disk drive. Now, if you thought a diskette like this hold a lot of information, well, wait till you see the hard disk drive. We can copy all our programs onto the hard drive and still have plenty of room for our documents. And the hard drive accesses data much faster than a floppy disk. A floppy might take 1/10 of a second or more to find a single piece of information. This hard drive, it takes only 15 milliseconds. That's literally faster than the blink of an eye. Once you start using a hard disk drive, you'll only want to use floppies to make backup copies instead of, or installing programs instead of using them all the time. So now we're going to put the disk drives into the case. Now, the disk drives, obviously, for obvious reasons, we have to be able to put disks in the front, so they'll be up at the front of the case, and we've got openings in the case for those disk drives. They're going to mount like this. The little disk drives, which are the hard disk drive, 3.5 hard disk drive, and 3.5-inch floppy disk drive, are going to mount on their sides in this part right here. And then the 5.25 drive is going to mount just like that. We still have, as I said, room, extra bays, one more in the little one and one more in the big one. You might want to put a CD-ROM drive in there, or perhaps a tape backup system. It's always nice to have extra room in a case. So the first thing we'll do is we'll take out this mounting bracket, and we're actually going to mount the hard drive and the 3.5-inch drive into the bracket, and then we'll mount the bracket into the computer. The drives go into the bracket. Let's make sure we've got it the right way. Just like this. I don't know if you can see that. They go in sideways just like that. It's a pretty tight fit, but that's okay because we don't want them sliding around in there. And we'll line it up. You'll see the bracket has holes for all different kinds of screw configurations. You'll line up the appropriate holes, and we'll just screw them in just like that. Same thing with the hard disk drive. You want to make sure you mount it pretty sturdily so it's not going to shake around. But again, just hand tighten the screws. If you tighten them too much, you can strip them, and it makes it hard to remove the drive later if you want to service it or replace it. So I don't think we need to show all the screwing that's going to happen now. So let's take a break. I'll put the drives in, and then we'll start to mount the bay. Okay, before we put that bay back in with the 3.5-inch hard drive and the 3.5-inch floppy, we need to put this in so we can screw it in from the side. Now remember, every case is different, so there'll be different orders and so forth. You just have to figure it out on your own or use the instructions that come with your case. But you see, that slips very easily into the front panel. I should probably show you what I did here. I removed this plastic protector. It's just a little piece of plastic, and it just pops right out like that. And again, there's room here for expansion, but we're going to leave it in for the time being because we don't have anything to put in there. So I removed the plastic panel, and I'll slide this right in there. This is the 5.25-inch drive. Make sure you do it right side up. The light will be on top. The door will flip down. And you want to make sure it's flush with the front of the computer like that. And then just screw it in. You don't need to screw in too many screws. Just 2 on each side is fine. And I usually do them at opposite corners of the drive. So there'll be one on the top right and one on the lower left. That should hold it in pretty well. You can see there are 4 screw holes here. 1, 2, 3, 4. We only need to really screw in 2 screws. I usually do them catty corner from each other. So let me screw this one in. And again, hold the disk drive just so it's flush with the front of the case. You want to make sure it's just in the position. That doesn't really matter to the functionality of it, but it'll give you a nicer look when you're through. All right, we're going to do the other one on this side, and then we're going to finish the opposite side, and then we'll be ready to put the disk drive bay with the smaller disk drives back in, and we'll have our disk drives in the kit. All right, I'm just finishing up here. I've got the 4th screw in there on the 5.25-inch drive. All right, that's mounted nice and firmly in there. Now, you'll see the reason I had to take that bay out is because I had to reach into these screws on the side. Now I can put the bay back in, and we've mounted, once again, the 3.5-inch drive and the 3.5-inch hard disk drive into this metal bay. Now, I have popped out another one of these, and I want to show you how to do it. So let me do it one more time. I'll snap it back in. It's just a little piece of plastic that goes in just to kind of give it a nicer look when you have it in, and it just pops right out like that. Well, I won't bother putting it back in, but it's pretty easy to get out. I don't think you'll have too much difficulty doing it. Now we're going to once again slide the little drive, the baby drive, right in the hole there. Make sure that fits, and it does. And wonder of wonders, the screws line up too, so I'm going to screw that down, and we will have our discs all mounted. All right, and let's just get that one in there. There you go. See, if it doesn't fit, you just drill a new hole right in the case right there. All right, so we've got the case, the disk drives in the case, and they're pretty sturdily mounted. We've made sure that they're flush with the front of the case. All we have to do now is connect up the power and put a disk drive controller in, and the disk drives will be done. Okay, now we want to install the power cords onto the disk drive. I'm going to turn this on the side so you can see a little more clearly what we're doing here. And remember, there are a couple of different kinds of power cords. These will go on the hard disk drive, and there's only one way to put this on, so you don't have to worry about putting it on wrong. It just connects right in there. This one might take a little effort to push in, but again, don't force anything. Everything will fit pretty well. This one will go on the floppy disk drive, the 5.25-inch floppy disk drive. Just push it right in like that. And the little disk drive, the 3.5-inch disk drive, takes this kind of connector. There's only one way to put this one in. We'll just zip it right in there. Shouldn't be too much trouble. And it goes. The smaller the things get, with my stubby fingers, the harder it is to put them in there. There we go. All right, we've got the power connected. Let's see, what else do we have to do to get these disk drives working? Oh yeah, we have to connect them to the motherboard. We do that with a disk drive controller card, like this, another little circuit board. And you see it has pins all over it. These are for the different cables. This particular card can control not only the floppy disk drives, it will also control the hard disk drive, and it even has a serial port and a game port on it on the back for printers, modems, and other devices. Before I put this card in, I want to show you a little bit about how the cables will connect from the card to the floppy disk drive. It'll be a little harder to see once I put the card in. There are two different kinds of cables we're going to connect. The floppy drive cable connects here. It's a 33-pin cable. And the hard disk drive cable connects here. It's a 40-pin cable. So you'll see that there's no way you can get the wrong cable on the wrong connector. Here's the floppy drive cable. We'll start with this one. Now there's a little trick you need to know about connecting cables. You want to make sure that the wire 1 of the 33 wires is connected to pin 1 of the connector. Most of the cards have a little silkscreen indication of where pin 1 is. This one does. It says pin 1's there, pin 2's there, 33 and 34. So, and on the cable, pin 1 is usually, or wire 1 is usually marked with a red stripe. Can you see that? I don't know if you can see that red, but it's slightly red on the left-hand side there. That's... Okay, so... All right, so here's the cable. This is a 34-pin connector and a 34-pin cable.
Wait. Is it ready to go? Yeah.
Okay, so here's the cable. It's a 34-pin connector, and it's a 34-pin cable, so far right. Now I don't think you'll be able to see this on camera, but the very leftmost wire of the cable is red, has some red dots on it. That's the universal indicator of wire number 1. We want to make sure that wire number 1 goes to pin number 1 on the connector, so we make sure it's oriented that way. We can tell this is pin number 1 in the connector because it's silk screened on the board, and again I don't know if you can see that. But you will be able to in real life. And since we know that wire 1 is on the left and pin 1 is on the left, we're all right. We just push it in just like that. And it pushes in pretty easily. And that's how we'll connect the floppy disk drive. I'll just trim it over the back here and I'll show you how we do the hard disk drive. It's pretty much the same. Once again, you want to make sure that you match up pin 1 on the connector, which is right up here. And again, it's silk screened on the card. Yeah, I think you can see that. With the red wire, which I've done right here, and I don't think you'll be able to see that red, but you'll have to trust me that it's there. And I'm just going to push that right onto the connector. Be really careful that you get all the pins in all the holes. You don't want to bend a pin at this point. Once you do, just push it down. Okay? So we've got the cables connected. Let's put the card in the case. And that's not so very hard. You'll be doing this a lot. Every time you add a modem, CD-ROM drive, any kind of peripheral to your computer, they almost always come with an expansion card. And fortunately, this computer has 8 or 9 slots, so we can just pop it right in. Before we put it in the case, we'll have to remove this metal panel. Cards that have connectors on the back, like this one does, the connector comes out the back side of the case. I think we talked about that earlier. I'm just going to remove this panel by unscrewing it. A little more. You'll be doing a lot of this in your lifetime, believe me. It just pops right out. And I think I can drop this card in without reconnecting the cables, which will make it a little bit easier for me. The card goes in with the connector side down. These, I don't know if you can see those connectors, those teeth there. Those are the copper connections that will actually go right into the slot on the motherboard. And of course the connectors in the back, you want to make sure those are on the rear. It won't fit any other way, I don't think. And we'll just slide it right in. Most of the slots on most computers are identical, so it doesn't matter which slot you pick. As long as the card fits, it'll be okay. And we're just going to jam it in there. Don't force it. And you especially don't want to wiggle it too much because you can actually break the connectors by wiggling it. This one's not going in very easily, but with a little work, it'll slide right in. See, I just did what I said not to do. I wiggled it. I don't know why that's not going in a little more easily. There we go. Okay, see, it did take a little bit of effort, but not so much that you'd feel like you were breaking something. That's the key. You'll get to know exactly how much effort to exert on some of these things. And then do screw it back in. These cards can work loose over time, especially as the case heats up and cools down when the computer's on and off. And sometimes they'll actually walk their way out of the connection. In fact, that's always a good thing to check. If your computer starts malfunctioning, if weird things start happening, the first thing I always do is open up the case and make sure I don't drop a screw into it, and take all the cards out and put them back in again. That's always a good way to troubleshoot a computer. Let's see if I can. Well, I've got plenty of screws back here. No reason to fish around for that one. Just make sure you take it out before you close up the case. You don't want to cause any short circuits. All right. And there we go. Oh, we got our first casualty. I told you there'd be blood and guts in this short story, and there are. All right. You always get a few knuckles when you're skin knuckles when you're putting together a computer. There we go. We've got the controller card in. Shall we just go right ahead and put the cables on? All right. We've got them connected to the card. We were careful about doing that. Once again, if when you turn the computer on things aren't working, you want to go back and make sure you connected those properly. Okay, now we're going to connect the cables from the drive controller right onto the drive here. Now, there's one thing to consider on connecting the floppy drive cables. Here's the floppy drive cable, as you can see, and there are 4 connectors on it, but only 2 drives. And the reason is there are 2 different kinds of drives. This big tooth connector goes on the 5 1/4 inch drive, and this little tooth connector goes on the 3 1/2 inch drive. And the reason they give you 2 is so that you can have whichever you want be first. The drive at the end that's connected to the end of the cable will be your A drive. That'll be the drive that you'll be booting off of if you're going to boot from a floppy disk drive. And some programs have to install from the A drive. So you want to think carefully about whether you want your A drive to be a 5 1/4 inch floppy or a 3 1/2 inch floppy. For instance, if you're using OS2, you need to install from the A drive, and the A drive has to be a 3 1/2 inch floppy. So I think since most modern software uses 3 1/2 inch floppies, we're going to make that be the A drive. So we'll be using this connector, the little tooth connector, and that's going to be the A drive. That means the big tooth connector, a little ways down, is going to be the B drive. All right, here's our 5 1/4 inch drive. Oh, remember again that we want pin 1 to go to connector 1. And once again, we've got a red line on here. And this is actually a little easier because these kinds of connectors are keyed. There's only one way you can put it on, and it happens to be this way. It slides on very easy. These are about the easiest connectors you'll be putting on. And remember again, we're going to put this one on the A drive. And I've already checked to make sure that the pin 1 on the A drive is on the far side over here. So we'll make the red line up. And again, I'll just push the connector on. And there we go. All this extra cable, well, you can just kind of shove it in the case like that. It's not going to do any harm. Or you can be really tidy and clip it on and forget it. You'll mess it up anyway someday when you put something else in there. So I just shove it in there. Oh, let's connect the hard drive too. And again, we've got a hard drive connector that we've connected to the card already. And you notice it's got 2 connectors on it. That's so we can connect 2 hard drives. This card is called an IDE controller. It will support 2 different hard drives. In this case, we've only got 1, so we'll attach the end of the cable, and this will be free for later expansion. And again, we want to make sure we match up the number 1 pin on the cable, the number 1 wire on the cable, to the number 1 pin on the drive, and I've checked ahead. Usually it's written somewhere on the drive, and made sure that I've got these oriented properly. And again, just jam all that extra cable right in there. That's the macho thing to do. Isn't that pretty? Okay, we've got the drive connected, all the drives connected. We've got the drive card in. We've got to put a video card in now, and then we've got to connect all these little guys, and we'll be ready to run our computer. What should we do first? Should we put the video card in? That's going to be the easy thing to do. So let's turn this on its side. And I'll show you how you put the video card in. It's just like putting in the other disk drive controller. Got the video card over here. Leave the screwdriver once again. Oh, somebody has opened a slot for me, so we'll just use that one. I usually put the video card in the last slot, the one at the bottom or the far left of the case, because then I can remember that's where video is. And sometimes when you have a lot of different connectors on your back of your case, it's hard to remember which is which. They all look alike. In this case, we'll put it in the second to last slot. And you do it just like the other one. You slide it right in. Now wait a minute, this one's a little different. I better explain that. We have one extra little connector at the end here. This motherboard is what's called a local bus motherboard, and this is a local bus video card. Slide it into the slot, little firm pressure, not too much, don't wiggle it. And it should just go right in. Some of these are a little harder than other ones. You also want to make sure that the silvered metal piece is in the right place as well, because sometimes that can block the card. And I'll have to explain, this card is a little bit different. You'll see there's an extra connector at the end here. It's a local bus card. We'll explain what local bus is in a little bit. Let me slide that card in and we're going to screw it down. And we just screw it in. Again, always make sure to screw those cards in so they don't work loose over time. Now maybe I better explain a little bit about local bus. The bus is the data highway on your computer. It's how data gets from your disk drives into the processor so it can work on it. It's I guess, yeah, data highway is the best way to describe it. The original bus was designed to run at 8 megahertz, 8 million cycles per second. That's kind of a speed limit. The problem is modern processors like the 46 we just put in run at about 33 megahertz and faster, sometimes even 50 megahertz. Well, that means they're running a lot faster than the data bus can keep up with. In fact, that data highway really has turned into a kind of country road. So the only thing it really affects very much is video displays and hard disk drives. So to kind of accommodate the higher speed processors, more modern motherboards, 486 motherboards, have a direct connection right into the processor. It goes around the data bus. It's called the local bus, and that's exactly what this extra connector on the card is. The video will, instead of going through the regular data bus connectors here, will actually go right into that local bus and right into the processor at full speed. And it gives you a lot faster video display. All right, we've got the video card in. The connector's on the back, so we don't have to worry about any connectors. I think we're ready to just put these little power tails or whatever these are in here, and we'll be set to turn our computer on. Okay, well, we've got the video card in, we've got the disk drive card in, we've got the disk drives, we've got all our cabling hooked up. What more could we do? Well, we got these things. I don't know what these are. Let's just throw them in the computer. No, we should connect them. All right. These all have something to do with the operation. They're not critical. This one, for instance, the red and black one I can see goes to the speaker. Well, we need that so we can hear the machine beep and boop. You'll see on the motherboard there are connectors. Usually, and in this case, luckily, they're very close to the wiring that we want to hook up. They're right around here, and they're labeled on this motherboard. This one is the speaker cable, so we'll just hook it right up there, and when the computer wants to beep at us, see, you push it right on, it can beep at us. If you don't hook that up, it won't beep. In fact, if you want to turn off the speaker, just unplug it. Now, there are a bunch of wires. This one goes to the power light. I'll hook that up later. This one goes to the turbo light. This one goes to the hard disk drive light. Let me explain what a couple of these are, and then I'm going to hook them all up while you're not looking, because it's going to take forever. There's one that goes to a key lock on the front. That's so you can lock your computer so that nobody can use it without your permission. There's one that goes to a reset switch on the front. Resetting the computer is just like turning it off and turning it on again. And rather than reaching all the way to the back, if something goes wrong with the computer, if it stops working, for instance, we call that a crash, you just press the reset button, it starts all over again. So you do want to hook that one up. There's also a turbo switch, and that goes back a little ways, a little history on that. When the first high-speed chips came out, a lot of programs either stopped working or worked so fast nobody could use them. For instance, Space Invaders. I mean, imagine those aliens marching down really fast. You couldn't keep up. So the makers of the high-speed computers put a turbo switch on. When you press the turbo switch, it puts into the high-speed mode, but when you release it, it puts it back into the lower-speed compatible mode. You don't really need it nowadays. Almost all programs work with 486s, at least modern programs. But it's nice to have, I guess. You can hook it up if you want. When you press the button, the 33 megahertz 486 we've put in here slows down to 8 megahertz. I don't know why you'd want to do that, but it's there if you want to. Okay, through the miracle of television now, I've connected all of these connectors here. The turbo switch light, the keyboard lock, the power light. There's only one that doesn't connect directly to the motherboard, and that's the light for the hard disk drive. That light will light up when the hard disk drive is accessed. And that, of course, connects to the disk drive controller card. You'll find that jumper switch very easily. All right, I think we're done. We've got the hard drive controller in, the floppy drives. We've got the video card. You may add more cards to your computer as time goes by, or even when you buy it and install it, for instance, a modem card or a CD-ROM card, but this is enough for right now. I think before we put the top on the case and seal it up, we should probably check to see if this thing works. What do you say? Okay, we'll have to connect a few things. We got to connect a keyboard, and that you'll find is pretty easy to do. Remember that keyboard connector on the motherboard? We matched it up to the opening right there, and yep, it plugs right in. We also have our cable for the video display, and that connects right to the back of the case, right where the video card comes out. You just plug that in. There's only one way to plug it in, so you won't be able to do it wrong. And I won't screw those down for now, because if there's a problem, we may need to remove it. And you plug it right back into the back of the card. Now make sure the power switch is off. And then you can plug in your computer as well. Here's our power cords. This one's for the video display. And this one goes to the computer. Now this is the moment of truth, ladies and gentlemen. We find out whether this computer we built works. Now I have to tell you, there's only about maybe 50% chance that it'll work, because it's almost inevitable that you've got something reversed or you didn't get a card in all the way. If that happens, don't panic. That's why we didn't put the lid on. Just go back, methodically check that all the cables are connected correctly, that you've got the cards seated in well, that all the jumpers are set properly. And I think that the chances are pretty good you'll be able to get that computer working. And if you can't, well, don't worry. It's still under warranty, and bring it back. You ready? All right, let's turn the switch on. First thing you'll hear is the fan come on. And then you'll hear some whining as the disk drive turns on. Then we come over here and look at our screen. It checked the memory okay. But wait a minute, now we've got an error. It says CMOS checksum failure, CMOS display type match. Oh, now we can explain what that is. The CMOS, you'll remember, is where settings are stored for the computer. That's where the computer keeps track of what kind of display, how much memory, what kind of disk drives are attached. Well, it's the first time we've turned it on. Nobody ever told the CMOS. So we've got to run a program called setup and set the parameters for the CMOS. We'll do everything from set the date and time to tell it how much memory and what kind of disk drives and what kind of display. Now, every BIOS is different. This is running an Optima BIOS, it says here. Actually, it's American Megatrends, AMI BIOS, I'm sorry. And this particular BIOS wants us to press F1 to run the setup utility. So that means F key 1. I'm going to press it right now. We're going to see what happens. All right. This menu gives us some items: advanced CMOS setup, advanced chipset. Let's start with the standard CMOS setup. And we'll set the time and the date. And that's pretty straightforward. Now, the main thing we're going to have to do here is tell it what kind of hard disk drive we have. The CMOS will come with a variety of disk drive types, and what you'll need to do is examine your manual for your hard disk drive and find out what type it is. I've already done that, and I know we have a Type 17 hard disk drive. Many hard disk drives you'll need to actually set the parameters for by hand, but your hard disk drive manual should explain that. So we're just going to hit page down, and we're going to go to Type 17. And that's the kind of hard disk drive we have. You'll see there are parameters for the number of cylinders, the number of heads, the write precompensation, the landing zone, the sector, and the size of the hard disk drive. Depending on the drive you're installing, you'll either be able to just tell it what type it is, or you'll have to tell it it's Type 47, which is user-defined type, and enter in those numbers yourself. We don't have a D drive, just a C drive. Our floppy drive, remember we made the A drive a 5 and a 3.5 inch 1.4 megabyte drive. And the B drive, we made a 1.2 megabyte 5.25 drive. We're using a VGA type display. Most of the displays you use these days are VGA. Keyboard is installed. All right, I think we're done. I'll press Escape to exit and press F10 to save and exit. It's asking me, do I want to write to the CMOS and exit? Yes, I want to write the data that the settings I've just told it. I want to write that to the CMOS so it'll be saved. Press Y, hit return, and we're done. Again, it goes back, it checks the memory. We installed 8 megabytes, so I put in a little extra when you weren't looking. 8 megabytes. Now we're waiting. Now you're going to see another error message in just a moment because we haven't installed an operating system. It's looking at the disks and saying, wait a minute, there's nothing on there. That's fine. I'm going to put an operating system on there in a second. Before I do that, let's close up the cover. Okay, now it's time to install the disk operating system. We've got the CMOS setup done. The computer knows what kind of disk drives we have. It knows what kind of display, what kind of memory. But without a disk operating system, it's not going to work at all. Now, the most popular disk operating system is MS-DOS, and that's what we're going to install. Even if you're using Windows, you'll need to install MS-DOS first. If you're using OS/2 or some other form of disk operating system, I'll leave it to you to figure out how to do that. But this is how you install MS-DOS. First thing you do is insert the MS-DOS setup disk, disk 1, into the disk drive, and turn the computer on. Okay, we've prepared the hard drive just following the instructions that the MS-DOS's setup program gave us, and it's now copying the files over, and that's it. As soon as these are copied, we'll have a working computer, and then you can install whatever software you'd like to run, whether it's Windows or your favorite word processor, spreadsheet, or yes, even game. You have just built one of the most powerful tools known to mankind, the personal computer. And see, it wasn't that hard. In fact, it's not even that complicated. It's a lot less complicated than your own car. In fact, I'd wager there aren't many people in this country who have built their own automobile, but there are a lot of people who have built their own computer. And you're about ready to do that yourself. I hope you enjoyed our video, and if you've got any comments, we'd love to hear from you. You can write to the Computer Answer Man care of the address on the box of the videotape, or you can call me at 1-800-8-ASK-LEO. Well, thanks for joining me, and happy computing. I'm going to get to work here.